Welcome to the Zarlequan Infoverse!
The Zarlequan Indieverse.
Welcome to another exciting episode of the Brittany Starr Show. I'm your host, Brittany Starr, and today I'm excited to share with you a few guests. First off, we have Tim Kelly. He wrote the book, The Hidden History of Humanity, and also The Math Wizard. He shares some really interesting information about Atlantis, ancient Egypt, and what the pyramids were all about. And he also tells us how we can rejuvenate and heal ourselves through nature. So stay tuned for that. And then we have Vic Ferrari. He's an NYPD retired detective. And boy, let me tell you, he has some stories. He is hysterical. He's friendly. You don't want to miss this. And then our musical guest today is Creatio. He has such an angelic voice and he's such a great guy. I loved getting to know him and I can't wait to share him with you. So stay tuned because that's happening right now.
Welcome to the show, Tim Kelly.
Hello, thank you.
Can you tell our listeners a little bit about your journey as an author and the inspiration behind your books, especially The Hidden History of Humanity and The Math Wizard?
I actually knew I wanted to become a writer ever since I was a little kid. It's something I knew from pretty much first grade on. I was a spelling champion, speech champion, debate champion, won several writing awards that continued into high school. So it was something I always knew that I wanted to do. I became an independent author and eventually formed my own publishing houses. And that's how I got to writing any number of books. There have been actually more than 20, but some of the most recent ones do include Hidden History of Humanity and The Math Wizard.
So your work explores Atlantis and the path to enlightenment. What kind of insights can readers expect from your books?
Some of the most profound, I think. And right now, I feel that these insights are probably more needed than they have ever been. When you go back to ancient times, I feel we have been misled about the past. Many people have heard about Atlantis. They hear that it's just a story that came originally from one source, Plato. This is not at all true. The story of Plato has been backed up by several other people, including famous ancient historians like Diodorus of Sicily. There was a gentleman named Creatio who went to Egypt and found the story of Atlantis carved on pillars just like Plato said it was. And I have uncovered tons of evidence of an actual Atlantis, how it was founded, and of the advanced civilization that spawned it. Now, of course, when people are familiar with the Greek gods, they hear the idea of gods, and then they are not quite sure what to make of that. What exactly is he talking about, gods? What my research shows is that these were beings from another world who had came here, and as Plato says in his history, one of those beings from another world named Poseidon mated with a mortal woman named Clito. Now, I have uncovered evidence that our species, Homo sapiens, was actually engineered by positive beings from the stars that stood about 12 feet tall with blonde or gold hair and blue eyes. And they created this line of demigods, which is basically described by Plato. But this is an actual, verifiable historical story. We can talk about the Atlantean capital that once existed in a place called Poseidonis. This is in the Bermuda Triangle. Many people have probably heard tales of strange events that take place in the Bermuda Triangle. I believe that's tied into the sunken capital Poseidonis that was once there. To the east was another major city called Tritonus, and that was ruled over by one of the sets of twins. There were 5 sets of twins in a demigod line. And in Hidden History of Humanity, I talk about what Atlantis was like, how the Great Pyramid in Egypt is actually part of a Great Pyramid network, of which there was one once originally in the capital of Atlantis. This is actually backed up mathematically in the following way. If you go to a map of planet Earth and imagine a cube being inserted into the shape of the spherical planet, it will touch the planet exactly where the Great Pyramid in Egypt is. If you go exactly 90 degrees west, you will hit the Bermuda Triangle, where the capital of Atlantis once was. So there did used to exist this Great Pyramid network, and the pyramid in Egypt is part of this Atlantean legacy. Now, what they offered the demigods was a path to enlightenment, and had they chosen that path to enlightenment, then everything in history that we know, all the suffering, all the wars, it could have all been avoided. So what I do in Hidden History is take you through everything in Atlantis that I've uncovered, work you from there up to the advent of Sumer, which was a very dark civilization. And Sumer spread a path of darkness around the world, which is impacting us to this day. It does not need to. We have answers, we have solutions. And in the book, The Math Wizard, what I did was reverse engineer the path to enlightenment that was offered in Atlantis. It's a fictional novel, but the math and the science in it are real. And I can explain how I did the reverse engineering, but it actually does offer us this chance to have positive answers now, today, that we can use to make ourselves healthy and free and independent.
Well, now I'm like, well, what are they?
Okay, so a little bit of what has been uncovered. So there was an author by the name of Tony Bushby, and he wrote a series of books, including The Bible Fraud, The Secret in the Bible, and several other books. The book that is of interest here is the book called The Secret in the Bible. Now, his research was very impressive, and he certainly had access to some esoteric sources, to be sure. But what he talks about is the mystery schools that existed in ancient Egypt. Now, these are very well known to ancient historians, and many of the most famous figures of history, including Plato himself, were initiates and graduates of this mystery school. For example, when many people think that some of these nations had independent, spontaneous histories, clearly they did not. Think of the Roman Empire for a second. Most people are familiar with the Roman Empire and what a great role it played in history. How many people are familiar with the following fact? The very first emperor in the Roman Empire was an initiate into the mystery school, and he was initiated in the mystery school in Egypt. So this mystery school in Egypt had a 7-degree program. Bushby uncovered what those degrees were. Now, what I uncovered was that there was a war that was fought, a war lost to history. I may be the first historian to actually mention it. This war was fought between the overlords of Sumer and the people who were administering the Giza Plateau where the Great Pyramid was, along with many other spectacular buildings and temples. And they were fighting the legacy forces of Atlantis left at that site in Giza. After the war, the forces administering Egypt lost, and the Sumerian overlords took over. They pestered the locals to explain what was being taught in the mystery school. And then once they learned what was being taught, I believe they gutted it and they stripped out the most essential elements. So yes, you could have initiates from Greece, from Rome, from other areas going in and going through the program, but at that point it was corrupted. So what I did is went back and reformed it back to its original form. Now, how did I do that? I used Bushby's work as a reference, and then I looked at the greatest minds of all time and everything that they had uncovered, and I re-pieced together what a 7-degree program would be to help one understand a fully functioning Great Pyramid. So let me pause there for a second. The Great Pyramid, most people have maybe heard the classic theory that it's a tomb. That idea is completely ridiculous. It's been overturned by countless scholars, one of the greatest of which was Christopher Dunn, a no-nonsense machinist who wrote a book called The Giza Power Plant. So if you follow through the premises developed by Christopher Dunn, you will come to the following conclusion. At its lowest level, the Great Pyramid was a communication device, and it could communicate wirelessly like our technology today, but on a far grander scale. Beyond that, it had a power function, so it could actually broadcast power. Now, in recent times, there was a great genius, Nikola Tesla, who was trying to broadcast free power to the world. My research shows that he was actually, it is said that he visited the great psychic Edgar Cayce, who told him he was a reincarnated Atlantean. I think that's probably accurate. And largely, he was doing a crude version of what the Great Pyramid could do, which was broadcast free power to the world. And beyond that, at an extremely advanced level, was a defensive capability where a Great Pyramid could use something called interferometry, select a target, and overload it with so much energy that the target would explode.
Wow. Really intense topic. That's you brought in so many different people. I actually named my daughter after Nikola Tesla. That's funny. Whew, So, is all of this gone over in your book?
It is indeed. In the Hidden History of Humanity, I go over the story of one group of positive beings who were trying to encourage us to be our best. There was a neutral group, a very strange group. They are definitely not of this world. They were a group I call the Cyanians. They were blue-green in skin, had elongated heads, were amphibious, and strangely enough, hermaphrodites. They were capable of parthenogenesis, which means giving virgin births, which is interesting to many historical religions and ideas. And then there was an extremely negative reptile group, the ones that founded Sumer. And I talk about how all of these groups have vied for control of this planet and its resources. And in The Math Wizard, the fictional novel, it's based on a premise that the grandson of Poseidon chooses to go through the learning program on the path to enlightenment. So you get to see it as he sees it. Another of my books is Natural Healing Self-Empowerment. And in that nonfiction book, readers can learn about how to get rid of 99% of all pathology, get rid of allergies. In addition to that, the health book also offers the ability to regenerate the human body, which is something else that I'm not aware of too many people knowing how to do. And the biggest theme that I would say runs through all of my work is that paradise on earth is possible. And one of the main ways that it becomes possible is harmony with nature.
You have so much information. I feel like we are barely even scratching the surface, but time. Can you tell people how they can get a hold of your books and find you online?
If you go to the search engine duckduckgo.com and type in my company name, Polytope Press, it should be the first website that comes up.
Thank you so much for your time and for sharing all of this. I mean, again, I think we're only scratching the surface. So much more to share with the world. Thank you for being on today, Tim Kelly.
Thank you so much for this opportunity. I very much appreciate it.
Conversations with indie authors.
Welcome back to the Zarlequan Indieverse. I'm your host, Brittany Starr, and today I have found a really special guest. He was an NYPD detective, and now he's telling you in funny ways what that was all about. Welcome to this show, Vic Ferrari.
Hey, Brittany, how are you? Thank you so much for having me on your show. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for being here. Can you take us back to the beginning? So you were an NYPD detective, and now you're writing humorous stories about it. So how'd that come about?
I'm a Bronx kid, born and raised in New York City. Always wanted to be a New York City police officer from about the age of 5. My parents used to take me to the movies, which was around the corner from the local police station. So I was more interested in the police cars and the cops standing outside as opposed to Herbie the Love Bug or Chitty Chitty Bang Bang or whatever the hell they were taking me to see. And I always tell the story by the age of like 12, 11, my friends and I would sneak into the local post office and steal FBI wanted posters off the wall and then go around the neighborhood conducting manhunts. I don't know what we would have done had we found a fugitive, but that was kind of the thing to do. By 20, I took the exam. By 21, I got called. I went into the police academy. I had a wonderful 20-year career with the New York City Police Department. I worked in a lot of different units. I worked at a DUI unit. I worked in the narcotics division. And my last 10 years, I was a detective in the NYPD's auto crime division. So think of anything with chop shops, stolen vehicles, exporting stolen vehicles out of the country, a lot of mafia cases, anything with organized crime that went back to the auto theft industry. And I did 20 years. Enough was enough. I retired. I moved down to Florida and I got into writing. And I've written a series of books. I've written 7, and 4 of which are a behind-the-scenes look into the New York City Police Department.
7 books altogether. What are the other ones about?
A couple of comedies. One is about my childhood. It's called Confessions of a Catholic High School Graduate. It's about growing up in the Bronx and what it was like going to Catholic high school and being a mischievous teenager. And my other book was called Dickheads and Debauchery and Other Ingenious Ways to Die. And that points out the ridiculous ways that people shorten their life expectancy.
Oh, wow. That's interesting. But so 4 whole books just on the NYPD. So you have plenty of material. How do you make it humorous?
Well, when I got into writing these NYPD books, the first thing I said was, I don't want to embarrass anybody. I'm not a sour grapes person. Were there people I didn't like? Yeah, absolutely. Who likes that, always gets along with their coworkers. But what I tend to do is my books are all, there's no beginning, middle, end. All my books are a series of short stories about things that happened during my career, sometimes funny, sometimes dark, sometimes unbelievable. It gives the reader a behind the scenes look of what goes on inside the New York City Police Department. And I'm just getting my 5th book out now on the NYPD, and people go, "Are you running out of stories?" I'm like, it's a little more difficult in the beginning, because in the beginning I was like, how am I going to actually write this without embarrassing people? Or, how am I going to pull this together? But I've done it. I wouldn't say I'm running out of stories, but it's getting a little more difficult.
Can you share like a couple of highlights?
What would you like to hear? Do you want to hear dark? You want to hear funny? You want to hear sinister?
I want to hear funny.
I'll give you funny and sinister. So it's the early 90s, and there was this cop, worked up in Harlem. He's very lazy, and couldn't find a partner. So what they do in the NYPD is they'll put you on a foot post, and you're by yourself. So it's a Friday night. He's got a foot post by the housing projects, and a call of a DOA comes in. So he gets in the elevator, goes up to whatever, the 15th floor. And what it was is, you had this elderly gentleman that lived in an apartment by himself. He died. His next door neighbor would meet him for coffee or check in on him periodically. When he didn't show up, the neighbor had the keys to the apartment. He opens it up and finds this recently deceased gentleman laying in his bed. So the cop gets on the radio, calls for the sergeant, calls for the EMTs, the detectives, everybody comes. All right, looks like a non-suspicious death. It's, elderly guy, heart condition, no forced entry. Everything's on the up and up. So as everyone's leaving, he turns to the EMTs and he goes, "Can you take the body?" And they said, "We don't take the body. You know that." See, in New York, when somebody dies in their apartment or their house, the cops are there until they figure out, is this a suspicious death or a non-suspicious death? And that usually falls on the medical examiner. So regardless of what the detectives think, the medical examiner is going to show up. He's usually the last one to show up, because there's only a couple and they're very busy. So the medical examiner is going to show up after everything, ask a lot of questions, and he's going to say suspicious death. The body's going to go to the morgue. Not suspicious death. Tell the family to call the funeral home. Well, that could take hours. And this was a Friday night. This cop didn't want to get stuck guarding this DOA for the night. So he's, pleading with the EMTs, "Can you please take this body?" And they tell him to kick rocks, and they leave. So about 15 minutes later, that same cop gets on his radio and calls in a cardiac into the same apartment. Well, the same two EMTs show up. They hadn't really left the neighborhood. So they come running up the stairs or the elevator when they've got all their equipment. And now that dead guy that was in the bed is in the hallway. And they go, "How the hell?" The cop sees the same two EMTs. He knows the jig is up. And they go, "How did he get out here?" And the cop goes, "You're not going to believe this. I was sitting there writing in my memo book. The guy jumped up out of bed, said, 'Oh shit,' ran through the apartment, opened the door, and dropped dead again on the floor out in the hallway." Because they told him the only way we could take the body if it's in public view. So this genius took it upon himself to drag the dead guy out of his bed across the apartment and drop him in the hallway. And now the guy's got rigor mortis. So now the body is starting to, the body is in the same position it was in the bed. So they start complaining. The supervisor shows up, yada, yada, yada. He loses 30 vacation days, gets put on a year probation, and gets transferred up to the Bronx. Had that happened now, he probably would have gotten arrested and fired, but this was in the early 90s. But yeah, that really happened.
That should be a movie. It should be.
I hope somebody wants to do a movie about my stories. I'd be more than willing to listen.
That would be awesome. You said the mafia. Now, is that still a factor? Like, I remember movies in the 80s and 90s, and that was like a big deal. Of course, I live up in the mountains where there's no people, and the bears really aren't too mafia-ish. So is that really a thing still now?
Yeah, the mob has always been around. It's not the way it once was. The federal government and the New York City police, I could speak in New York, basically decimated them with the RICO statutes and confidential informants. They're still around. they're not as violent or have the same influence as they once did. But in any neighborhood, you're going to find a guy that's willing to loan you money, that you're going to find a guy that's willing to take your action on sports bets. And people come to them for things like, I'm having a problem with this guy. Can you talk to him? Sure, I'll talk to him. I'll hit him in the head with a baseball bat. But now you've got to give me $200 every month or every week or however the deal is worked out. So it's almost like making a deal with the devil. But oh, yeah, they were alive and well. I mean, during my career, I mean, the way I really dealt with them was they were very big in the auto theft industry in New York City. They ran a lot of the chop shops, and in Brooklyn and Queens, you have these massive salvage yards that are like a block long. And that's a place you get into an accident, you need a fender, you go there. You need an engine, you go there. So it's a legit business on the front, but in the back, the stolen cars come in.
And that's how you came in, because you were doing stolen cars, right?
Right. We would get search warrants and lock them up. And then sometimes we would do cases to see where the money went, as far as it's coming in this way, who's getting paid, are they getting paid checks? We did a case that wasn't the traditional mafia, but when airbags started becoming a thing where they, the federal government mandated that auto manufacturers had to install airbags, there was a place in the Bronx, it was a junkyard. Wasn't mafia per se. Do I think he was kicking up to the mafia? Yeah, I think so. But anyway, this guy was paying car thieves $500 for a set of airbags. And he said, that's a lot of money. But yeah, then they would turn around and sell the airbags for $1,500 to junkyard, to body shops and unsuspecting owners. Sometimes people get their own airbags back. I mean, these guys were hitting car dealerships over the weekend and like wipe out, they break into the cars on the lot and steal 30, 40 sets of airbags.
Wow. These are never things I would think of doing.
Well, his mistake was the guy that was running the operation was paying the thieves with checks, and then they would go to a check cashing place. So it kind of made it really easy. The way we got them was the detective that was running that case. They set up they did it with the FBI. They set up a post office box of a phony business in New Jersey, the next state over, and these guys were shipping airbags all over the world. So, they started up this phony company, and they called up and they started a line of credit with them, and they started buying airbags. And once you put something in the mail, now they got you on federal charges for mail fraud, interstate transportation of stolen commerce. There's a ton of things in the federal law that they can crucify you with. So that's basically how they got this guy. But oh yeah, and he had to forfeit millions of dollars. And then after we got him, then we went after all the thieves who were good and nice enough to cash his check.
It seems like it's always those simple things that they get caught on. Like for some reason people think, well, nobody cares about me, I'm not important, and they make huge mistakes.
And that you just nailed it. You just nailed it, because it's like, they're not going to be looking at me. Well, it's like eventually they are going to be looking at you, especially if you're playing out of bounds. So, and people talk, and I mean, this guy was just so blatant. I mean, there were guys coming in with duffel bags on a Monday morning after like wiping out car dealerships in Jersey and Westchester County, and then they would come into this place, this junkyard in the Bronx.
Tell us about your book. The book that we were talking about is Through the Looking Glass. That's the one that I found you from.
Yeah, it's loaded with short stories from my NYPD career. Again, my books don't have a beginning, middle, end. You'll come to a chapter, like one of my books has a chapter called Crossing Over to the Dark Side, and that deals with police corruption. Or there'll be a chapter in one of my books, what goes on in the locker room in an NYPD precinct. And, the guys down there shooting. I don't know if this still goes on, but guys shooting fireworks. I mean, I worked in a couple of places where the practical jokes were just nonstop. Like one guy was going bald, and this was in the early 90s, when Rogaine had first come out, and they were advertising the hell out of it. And he made the mistake of leaving the bottle in his locker, and he left his locker open. So these two guys in his squad emptied the contents of his bottle into another bottle, and then they filled up the Rogaine bottle with wood stain. And then the guy's applying it to his head, and he kind of shellacked his head, and he went nuts. Like they had to kind of basically physically restrain him from attacking these two guys.
Wow. It sounds like just like a high school mania.
There was some of that. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, but you enjoyed it.
Oh, I thrived in it. It's It's having a front row seat to the circus. It
That's
really
really
is, because there's all sorts of acts. There's, the public, and then you have behind the scenes what goes on, and that sometimes is even more interesting.
Oh, really?
Oh
That's
yeah.
funny. Yeah.
After I retired from the NYPD, I moved down to Florida, and I figured, you know what, I'm going to get back into law enforcement. So I started working for the small police department in Florida, and it was like night and day. It was like having a stroke and having to learn everything all over again. That was just a little bit different. And in Florida, they're definitely more customer service friendly, but there was a lot of differences. Like in Florida, they were very big on DUIs, whereas in New York, yeah, if you came across one and the person got into an accident, you would lock them up. But there was just too much going on for us to get involved with DUIs back then. Down here during my training, I spent a half a day learning how to wrestle an alligator. And I says, well, can't we just shoot these things? And they're like, no, we don't want you shooting alligators. Like, I was like, I'm just going to shoot them. No, can't shoot alligators. Down here in Florida, they're very big with the taser. In New York, we had them, but the cops didn't carry them. The supervisors did. So that was interesting. And to carry a taser, you had to be tased as part of your training. And they didn't shoot you with it. What they did was you come in one morning and they tape one lead under your armpit, the other one to your crotch. And then they've got two guys standing in back of you and they go, all right, are you ready? And they let you have it for 3 to 5 seconds. I didn't like it.
Yeah, I don't imagine that would be pleasant.
No, you could mace me all day long. I don't care. But the taser, I don't like that thing.
Wow. So what was okay, besides alligators, what's the biggest difference between small town? Do you go about things? You were saying customer service is a little different. I would say that where I'm at, the law enforcement is a lot friendlier than in the city. They're more caring, but they also overlook a lot of things.
It just depends. Like, they would down here in Florida, like the police department I work, like in New York, if you're a patrol cop and you get called to something, you take the report. If there isn't an arrest to be made in the first, it's not obvious that the person's standing there, you're going to throw cuffs on him. You take the report, you send it to the precinct, and the detectives come and pick the guy up, be it domestic violence or someone passed a bad check. If the bad guy isn't there. In Florida, the detective in the police department I worked in, at least, the detectives got involved in more of the serious crimes. The patrol cop, because it wasn't as busy, and you weren't answering 30 calls a night down in Florida. So if you took a report on someone, like for domestic violence, and the guy wasn't there, you were expected to go back a couple of times, you know what I mean, to see if you could pick the guy up. So I found that interesting, that you kind of ran with the case until it got, after a while, and then it was enough, and then you would kick it up to the detectives.
Oh, that's probably just the amount of people alone.
Right. You want to hear another story?
I do.
I'll tell you the Hansel and Gretel story. So it's the early 90s, and we're all, young guys, and we're going to these cop bars, and there's cops from different precincts, and, we're meeting girls. And there was this one guy that worked in the next precinct over, and in his spare time, he was an amateur magician. So he would come to the bar and you're talking to girls, and then he would come over and he starts pulling the flowers out of his sleeve and pulling gold coins from behind the ears, basically cock blocking us with magic. So I told his old partner, who I actually worked with later, I said, hey, get him out of here. Like, how do you compete with this guy? And he goes, if he was as into fighting crime as he was making balloon animals for kids, he'd be the greatest cop in the world, but he's lazy. So a couple of weeks later, the magician and his partner get called down to a 6-story basement apartment in the Bronx. 6-story walk-up building, and in the basement, you have a couple of apartments. The superintendent usually lives down there. And it was a 911 calls for help. There's 2 doors. They go to door number 1, they bang on the door, and nobody answers. My old partner goes to bang on door number 2, and the magician stops him. He goes, come on, it's midnight. We've got our radios on, our nightsticks. We've made all this noise. This is a joke. If anyone called 911, they would have come out already. We made enough noise. So my buddy was going to pound on the door again. He goes, come on, I'll buy you a cup of coffee. Said, all right. And they don't pound on door number 2, and they leave. What they don't realize is behind door number 2, the super of the building is selling drugs out of the apartment. And he got addicted to it, and he fell behind he was buying coke up front on consignment, and then he got addicted to it, and then he wasn't paying his wholesale. Well, in the drug world, they don't cancel your cable or send you legal notices. And the guy knew he had a problem, and he wasn't leaving his apartment because he knew they were going to kill him. So the way they got him, the way they got him was, it's an old gypsy trick. They got a really attractive female. They came at night. They knock on the door and they put the female's face in front of the peephole. So the super goes, "Oh, wow." He opens the door and three of them bum rush him. They're pistol whipping him. Where's the money? Where's the drugs? He doesn't have an answer. So they shoot him in the head. They roll him up in a carpet and they take him out of the apartment and they throw him in the furnace. So while he's going up like a fire log, they go back into the apartment and they're ransacking it. And that's when the magician and my buddy show up. And they're just about to knock on that door. And the three of them in there, they got guns and they're ransacking the apartment. So the two guys tell the female who's in on this. They said, "Listen, if these cops knock on the door, let them in and just start screaming in Yugoslavian and lead them through the hallway. We're going to hide in this bedroom. When you get past the threshold of this doorway, throw yourself on the floor. We'll come out and shoot the two cops in the head. We'll throw them in the furnace and we'll get the hell out of here." And that was the plan. But they never knocked on the door. So they leave. So the super of the building had family. And after a week or two, the family's getting nervous. Where is this guy? What they wind up doing is they call the cops. The detectives get involved. And then the detectives see that there was a 911 call there the week before. So they bring in the two cops and they say, "Anything suspicious? Did you notice anything?" And they said, "No, you know what's funny? There were two doors. We knocked on this door. We didn't knock on the second door." And they go, "Well, it's a good thing you didn't knock on that door because the guy's vanished." But what's funny is my buddy, when they were leaving, there was a car parked on a fire hydrant out front, which was the getaway car. And he wrote it a parking ticket. So through that parking ticket, it was registered to the female. They brought her in for questioning. She starts spilling her guts, trying to minimize her involvement, of course. And then they were able to lock everybody up. And then the detectives had to go back to that building. It was like February, and shut the heat off to get this guy's bones and skull out of the incinerator. So it had to cool off for a couple of days. So that story is in NYPD Through the Looking Glass. And I think it's called "Last Night a Magician Saved My Life," because had the magician not stopped my buddy, they would have been in the furnace.
These are unbelievable stories. Like, who comes up with this? I've watched these kind of old movies, where, yeah, we're going to get the cops and shoot it. And that's completely crazy. These should definitely be movies. I think they should hunt you down. Thanks for being with me today. Thanks for coming on and sharing your stories. This was great.
Sure, no problem. Can I just plug where people can find my books?
Absolutely.
Sure. So just go to Amazon and type in my name. Go to Amazon Books and type in my name, Vic Ferrari, like the car, and my book library will come up. All my books are in paperback. They're $10. They make great Christmas gifts, or $2.99 ebook download. You can preview them for free. And I just recently started my own podcast. And what I do is I bring on retired NYPD members that I worked with and worked in different units to tell their story. So it's a lot of different NYPD stories, but besides my own. And that's I named that after my book, NYPD Through the Looking Glass.
Oh, that's the name of your podcast too.
Yeah.
Nice.
Use the same artwork.
Oh, sweet. Perfect.
I own it, so I might as well use it,
Absolutely. I will put your links in the description box below well for everyone else so they can find you, because I'm all about promoting indie artists. So everybody, Vic Ferrari.
And today we have indie artist spotlight with Steven, or Creatio, an alt blues musician who's going to share with us his story. So welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Can you take us back to the beginning? What inspired you to start making music, and how did you come up with this genre?
So I guess it goes back to being just a kid. Ever since I can't think of a time in my life where music wasn't very important to me. I just remember started with country music when I was really young. And then it graduated into rock, and then kind of into heavy metal into high school. And then I don't know, I kind of got to this point in life where, like, I listen to a lot of everything now, personally, things that I actually like. So my variety and taste is very wide. But
You like a
I
little bit of everything.
remember like my parents like yelling at me as a kid to go to sleep, like because I'd be in my room pretending to be on stage, like on my bed. You know what I mean? Playing my guitar. So
I totally
it's
know what you
always
mean.
been there, man. It's always been there.
So I don't know if you know Striper or like Striper, the band.
Ringing bells, but I don't think I may not be familiar with them.
So they were an 80s hair band, but they
That's
were
what I thought.
Christian. They were like, they had the yellow and black attack. And so my parents, I grew up Christian in East Texas, and we love Striper and we love to put on shows. So my mom actually went and cut out with plywood the shape of their guitars, and we painted them yellow and black, and we used to put on shows in the living room for my parents that we were
that's
Striper.
that's awesome.
So,
Music is a wonderful thing. It's just a wonderful, wonderful thing.
so that's where the passion came from. It just came out of you. You write your own songs?
Yeah, I do. I have a whole album on my website. It's, if you don't like ads and stuff, or don't have those premium streaming services, you can always go to my website and listen to the whole album for free with no ads. So
Oh, wow.
that's a thing. I don't know. The internet's changed the landscape of how music is shared and created, and I the way that it is now, it's just kind of out there, and I figure what better than just give it away for free. I mean, I
Yeah.
get, the shows are one thing, but I do a vast, but the shows are different because the shows I'll do like covers and stuff too. Um, but I enjoy playing my originals the most, for sure.
Yeah. You were talking that you're on tour. Can you tell us where and
Constantly. So my website has all my dates. I try not to look at my dates before more than like a week out. So my wife kind of does all my um like booking, and she works with my manager to keep me like moving around from place to place. But I try not to look at my schedule more than a week at a time, because if I do, I get a little overwhelmed. And uh last week I was in Kentucky, or I think it was last week. Last week I was in Kentucky. Probably like the week before that I was in somewhere in Virginia, I think. And I mean, I go all over. I've been all over the US playing music. So nowhere's off limits, as long as it's feasible.
do you take your whole family with you when you tour?
I take my 13-year-old goes a lot. She went out on the road for the first time with me a couple summers ago. Like, not this past one, but the one prior to. I took her all the way to Utah and taught her kind of how to do the thing, with the setup and the teardown. And now anytime I go out of town, she's like, Dad, where are we going this weekend? So she's traveled a lot. She's seen the Grand Canyon twice now. So
Nice.
she's a little nomad just like me. She enjoys it, and I think it's kind of a family affair. My wife goes a lot too, and of course the baby comes with when she comes. But it's nice to have the family on the road, because a lot of times, when I was doing this when I was a little younger, it wasn't the case. I was just kind of grinding out there on my own, and
Yeah.
I didn't have as much how do you say it, stability on the road as I do now. I have nicer amenities than I did when I was a little younger.
Oh, that makes sense. Oh,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Having a nice van definitely changes things.
And having the support of your family. That's amazing.
Yeah. I'm very, very blessed and thankful in that way. They don't try to change me, or don't expect me to be something I'm not, and that's very comforting. Because growing up, I was always told, don't be a musician, it's not safe, it's not a good idea, all those things that people tell you to say, like, hey, you need to do something a little bit more stable. And the truth is, it's just like any other job. You just have to work hard. and it's going to be hard work. Any job that you work there's going to be things you don't want to do. There's going to be days where you don't want to be there. I have those days still, but I think the saying goes, if you do what you love, you'll never work a day in your life. But
Mhm.
what they don't tell you is you will work harder than anyone around you because you love what you do. So
Yeah. That is absolutely
with that
true.
comes balance too. So like it took me a long time to figure out the balance. Trust me, being on the road and having a family, it can be kind of a tightrope walk sometimes, but you know.
I hear that. Can you take us into your creative process? How do you write the songs? What inspires you in creating the music?
Okay. Yeah. So for me, I tend to be kind of an emotional writer. A lot of my pretty much all of my songs, come from some sort of life experience, even if it's a story that may not seem like it's of this time, or whatever. I have a song I'm working on currently that's kind of like that. It kind of sounds like an old Western, like bandit on the run kind of thing, but I kind of grew up a little rambunctious, so it's kind of where that comes from. It's not, you know, necessarily old timey, but it's more, I just kind of took a little pieces of me and put it into the story. But that's kind of how I write. It starts a lot of times with some lyric that I think is clever, or just something pops in my head and I write it down. And if it's clever, it makes it into a song. Or sometimes a lot of times I just play guitar on my couch or in my studio down here at home, and I'll hear something on the guitar and it evokes a thought or an emotion, and I try to expound upon it. um Writing a song is a bit like catching lightning in a bottle. At times it can be, um there's two kind of ways that it happens. So sometimes it happens all at once. The song will just kind of like pour out of you, and it's like, wow. Like some of my best songs are just happened, I wrote in 10 or 15 minutes, and other ones it took me a lot of life and a lot of experience to kind of live and draw from. You know what I mean? So um there's, you never kind of know when the inspiration is going to hit. It's not quite like a light switch. uh in that way, you can't just, I mean, I guess you can do things to help like turn it off and on, but you can't just turn it off and on. You have to put like time in the room, and try to kind of like soul search a little bit, you know.
Mhm. So I was telling you my dad's a musician and I make
Mhm.
music. I'm terrible. It's awful, but I'm inspired and so I do it.
It's okay. It's okay. Everybody's got to start somewhere, so that's fine.
Right? I'm like, I kind of thought something would rub off because my dad's a good musician, but it didn't. But again, I'm creative and I have inspiration. And so I was thinking about that with the writing music. Chat GBT is all really big right now. So I
Mhm.
write my own songs and I'm like, okay, Chat GBT, write me a song. And it did. And I'm like, but I have zero inspiration to sing this or put music to it. I have no idea what this is supposed
So
to sound
I
like.
tried, when Chat GPT kind of first came out, everybody's going, "Oh, you're going to be out of a job, man." And I'm like, "Okay, we'll see." So I curious as I was, I headed on over to Chat GPT and I was like, "All right, we're going to write a song today." And I was like, you know, we're going to crack this thing open. And so I did, and it'll get you kind of there, but it's not really, you know what I mean? There's a lot of things that aren't human about it. It just doesn't
Yeah,
have that human touch. So it's still, I think, a long way. I mean, I'm sure it'll evolve over time, but it's got a ways to go before I think I have to worry about it as a competitor, you know.
I agree. It doesn't have the passion, which is
No,
what the humans
it
bring.
doesn't have human. Well, the thing that humans have we're emotional beings, and and those I'm gonna speak a little candidly here. I have bipolar disorder, so um that's kind of a bit like riding a wave at times. You have
Mhm.
to be aware of where you're at on that wave, and I think just like light is waves, sound is waves, energy moves in waves. So
Yeah,
it's all waves. And I don't think that the computer can ride the wave like we can. You know what I mean?
I agree. You know, that reminds me, Sinead O'Connor. She was bipolar
Mhm.
and she just passed recently. But I think that honestly, however torturous and awful it was for her, it also made her extremely creative and gave her that insane passion.
It does. So I attribute my bipolar disorder to the most creative parts of me, actually. Um, I feel things a lot deeper, I think, than some other people, maybe. And I'm not saying that not everyone is capable of doing this, but like when you feel something so intense that it makes you want to act in some way, I think that is the essence of a good song. And if you can capture that, then you can make a good song. And I think the bipolar kind of acts as like a tuning fork to that, if you really know how to use it correctly. Obviously you don't want to be like running around manic and psychotic all the time, so take your meds. Find what works for you. For me, I'm on a very low dosage of medication. My problem is I don't sleep. I will stay up for days. I will get in these, and then that's not ultimately good for you. So I have a little help sleeping at night, but um I found that like too much medication kind of turns the creative faucet off altogether, and too little medication, well, that's not good either, because then I'm kind of like not managed and I'm not being realistic in life, and that's not good either. So there's a balance, the absolute balance. And I think that's just life. You got to
Yeah,
balance things. You have to be able to be attuned and aware of yourself in the situation. And
absolutely.
you know
I'm excited here. We're going to have your links in the description box so everyone can find you. But I listen to your music, it's beautiful. Can
Thank you.
you introduce this song that the audience is about to hear?
Yeah, sure. So that song is called Going Nowhere. It's the most recent release that I've had. I released it about a year or two ago, maybe. I can't remember. It's been out for a while, but that song is kind of, mm, for me, what it means. I've had other people say it means different to them, so that's the beauty of music, though. Um, for me, I wrote the song kind of from a place of just the grind of the road. So for a long time when I was younger, I had trouble coping with being on the road a lot. And unfortunately, when you're a musician, like you have to, like, there's just no way around it, really. I mean, I guess you could do, solely streaming stuff, but it's really hard not to make a living and not have several different kind of revenue streams coming in to make it all work out. Um, so back then I was just touring, and I was just like touring and touring and touring. And then I would go out on these runs for like 30 days, and then I would come home, and like I would have a hard time coming home. Like the first thing you do when you come home from like a month on the road is you sleep in bed for like 2 days, because you're like home in your bed and you don't want to move. And then once you finally kind of like acclimate to the not going down the highway thing and not setting up or tearing down or being in a different time zone every night, it's kind of like, you I don't know, stop loss is maybe the way I would put it. Like you kind of come home, but your brain's still kind of on the highway. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
Um, and that can be hard for the people at home, like your family. For me, it was I would cope with things like drugs and alcohol, and I don't do that anymore. But it was hard. It took a lot of like figuring out and finding balance, and figuring out how to make it okay. You know what I mean? I know it's kind of woe is me, but um I've had a lot of things happen on the road that, like, life is just harder on the road, period. So when you come home and you're used to being at this like heightened state of like alertness, when you come home, you kind of feel like you still got to watch your back or something, and that can cause you to kind of maybe not be so cool at times. And that's kind of what
Yeah.
that song's about. It's about coping with being on the road. And it's literally like the first lyric is or some of the first lyrics were I'm going 15,000 miles an hour, but I haven't even left my home. Like
Yeah.
that's kind of where that comes from. But it's just my way of coping.
Nice.
Music is my way of coping, and that's what you're hearing on these songs. So I can just hope people identify with it.
I appreciate you being here today. Creatio.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Tune in next week when we have a whole new lineup. And remember, stay magical, my friends.
The Zarlequan Indieverse. And now for our musical guest.